Right, that should be it.
All right, hello everybody, and welcome to the session on Commission Policy Update. And we're starting a little bit late, but I'm still going to take my time. But I'm going to hit a timer. So those who know me think it's odd that I'm using a timer. I'm Ron Schultz, Policy Director at the State Conservation Commission. Hi, can you hear me in the back? I'll be rolling through some policy. Oh, it's Craig. You're getting old. Can't hear. I know. I'll be rolling through a variety of policy issues that we're covering at the commission and working with districts on and WACD. I'll spend a little bit of time on one particular issue, so I'm going to cruise through some other issues fairly quickly, just so that you get a flavor of what we're working on. And then hopefully I'll hit the 30-minute mark on time and hand it over to Allison, who will talk about sustainable farms and fields and the status of that. So let's jump right into it. So I wanted to give a very quick overview, because there's a lot of new people now at a lot of the districts, about what we do at policy at the commission. So we engage in a variety of issues at different levels. At the local level, we do engage as commission staff. We do engage on issues like land use through GMA, VSP, farmland preservation, food policy. At the state level, we're involved in salmon recovery, forest management, wildlife, water resources, water quality, a whole variety of issues. And at the federal level, the various USDA programs you're familiar with, as well as EPA programs. We work closely with EPA on water, air, environmental protection, and the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife on species management. And then NOAA fisheries, which is where the feds manage salmon. There's a lot of other, we engage on the legislative level, we engage at the congressional level, and at the local level with county commissioners. Work very closely with those folks. But where our statutory authority is very broad, I don't know if anybody, folks realize, but in our statute, it says there's a pressing need for conservation of renewable resources in all areas of the state, whether urban, suburban, or rural, and that the benefits of resource practices, programs, and projects as carried out by State Conservation Commission and the conservation districts should be available to all such areas. So if you didn't know it, your authority covers a variety of topics all over the state. So that includes urban and suburban and rural. So let me get to the first subject, solar facility siting. You may have heard of this one. It's been in the press. Some districts are getting involved in it. So solar facility issues are similar to when, if you remember, when they were originally siting wind power facilities. It's a very controversial issue. In some places, solar facilities could have long-term impact to habitat as well as long-term ag use of the land, although siting of facilities are typically a local government action. State law empowers projects of statewide significance to be approved by FSEC, Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, and FSEC has authority to override local land use decisions. So even if a local jurisdiction wants to argue, hey, solar facility isn't zoned, this area is not zoned for that, they can override that zoning. And there's a Supreme Court case out of Kittitas, where all the windmills are there in Kittitas, where that Supreme Court affirmed that authority. So we're working, we just recently had a meeting of staff internally at the commission to kind of organize ourselves around the issue. And then we're going to reach out and engage with WACD and conservation districts to start to formulate what our position would be on the issue and how we would want to work the issue moving forward. So I just wanted to give you the heads up that we're working on that one. Yeah.
So you're
just initially getting moving to get ourselves organized. Now it's a potential impact on viability of land, but also it's an opportunity for revenue for the landowner. So that's the tension in this issue. So how we'll probably approach this is similar to the way we approach taking out agricultural lands for salmon habitat projects. And that is, they're competing state priorities. We have a state priority for increasing green production, the production of green energy, but at the same time, there's a state priority for maintaining and enhancing ag production. So you have a tension of the priorities. It's just a matter of how do we work together to work through those competing demands. Food Policy Forum. Yeah, go ahead.
What's your engagement with WSCC right now?
Right now, we haven't started yet, but we're going to. Again, first meeting that we've had internally was on Friday, so.
And you are aware that the WSCC passed a resolution and you have a position paper about March this year?
Yeah, they should have one. They should have them by March of this year. That's right. Yeah.
Would you like me to contact the ACD to find out who else is doing this?
If you'd like, that would be great. That would be helpful.
Okay, you can talk to me.
Okay, that was hard. The Food Policy Forum, some of you are familiar with this. It was created by the legislature in 2016. The commission is a co-convener of the forum with WSDA. The forum is to address various aspects of the state's food system, particularly as it relates to small and mid-sized growers, and to connect the state's food production with distribution to address hunger and food availability. At the forum, we have the food and hunger community, as well as ag producers, as well as other state agencies that are involved in food programs. It's a great opportunity for all of us to get together and work through a variety of issues and opportunities. It's a great opportunity for districts that are already engaged in the local food system work, such as farm to market, food production and preparation education. We've done 2 rounds of grants that many of you are familiar with for food system work at conservation districts. We're hoping to do another round next fiscal year. And we'd like to bring the districts together around this topic as we move forward to be even more organized as districts around this. We've produced 3 reports at the forum. Any good state committee is worth producing reports for. And so we've produced 3 of them with recommendations on how to improve the food system. Currently, they're focusing on 3 areas: state marketing and brand. So trying to get a state brand for products. It's a very complicated, it sounds simple, just Washington grown or something, but it's actually a very complicated conversation. Another group is looking at land use and ag loss and preservation. Looking at right now the early jurisdictions of Snohomish, King, Pierce, and Kitsap, who have to update their comprehensive plans by the December of next year. But how do we engage with counties that are doing their GMA planning and updates to get them data about farmland loss and to recognize farmland loss in their land use planning? And then there's a third group that's looking at Farm Bill 2023, which is a pretty significant conversation because the Farm Bill is updated every 5 years. And this is our opportunity to try and influence from the state's perspective various elements of the Farm Bill. Farm Bill has 12 titles, and we at the conservation land pay most attention to Title II, which is conservation. But then there's Title 3 or 4, which is nutrition, which is basically 80% of the Farm Bill budget. And that gets into a lot of the food programs. There'll be more on this. CD elections. This was an issue last year. The commission and WACD created the Joint Committee on Elections. We met to develop recommendations for improvements to our system of election of CD supervisors. Recommendations were crafted into legislation, which was introduced this past session. Other legislation was introduced to move all CD supervisors to the general election ballot. Neither bill passed. As possible, the issue will come up again next session. The commission's position is that the JCE recommendations and bill are still supported by the commission, and we'll make a decision later this year whether to run the legislation again. So that's the status of the elections conversation right now. Waiting for questions. Okay.
Yes. I have big comments, but so I'm wondering why there wouldn't be discussion about possible running this year. I would think we would want to move that forward.
We could, but what we want to do is wait to see what how the election goes, and then to see who are. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. The question was why would we be waiting to make a decision whether to run the bill again? Why not just run it again? We just want to see how the election goes. How does it change the dynamics in the legislature and the interest of the legislature? Does it make sense to do the same bill? Okay, stock water, another hot issue. In 1994, Ecology issued a policy for conveying stock water away from streams to protect water quality. That 94 policy states change of water right process will not be required when small amounts of water consistent with historic practice are diverted to nearby stockwater tanks for consumption by livestock. Conservation districts have been utilizing this policy when engaging with landowners to develop plans for removing livestock from streams and surface waters. This approach has been an important tool to incentivize landowners by allowing stockwater use away from the stream. Ecology has proposed a change to that policy to clarify that any such diversion of surface water requires a water right or claim, and if no water right exists, one must be obtained by the landowner. And we know how difficult it is to get new water rights. The proposed change could have significant impact on CD work with landowners, as it'll be difficult to obtain the water right when removing the cattle. Commission staff is working with ecology staff on possible solutions. Commission staff will also engage with the CDs and WACD Livestock Water Committee to discuss possible solutions. The commission passed a motion in December of last year, asking staff to do this engagement with districts and ecology and come back with recommendations. So our plan is to come back targeting September on this particular issue. So it's a very contentious issue right now, but hopefully we'll be able to work out something. Okay.
So there was talk of listening sessions, day one, is that still on the course before September?
Yeah, we were going to partner with ecology on listening sessions, and we're not going to do that. Ecology wants to go a different direction, so we'll also go a different direction, engage directly with districts and have conversations with other entities in that way. Mike?
Our representative on the commission for Department of Ecology, has he said where he kind of stands on this? Is the agency ecology willing to work with CDs on this? Or are there any kind of
They're willing to work. He abstained on the vote. At that time, ecology was just sort of reeling from the pushback that they got and was kind of reorienting themselves to getting the comment and how to engage. They've said that they won't enforce the new policy, but it's still there. And there's a lot of pressure externally on ecology to work on water rights in these basins to stop withdrawals from certain limited basins. So I think ecology staff recognize the difficulty of the situation and are trying to figure out how they're going to engage with stakeholders. Yeah. Yes.
Mike, I think you were at the main meeting. The main meeting was, we had gotten a request, I did it, the executive director, of course, so did it at a strategic spot on the agenda, but the main meeting was a request for kind of an update on the issues from the ecology commissioner. I think they were re-examining where they were when the resolution was initially passed. They have engaged a little bit more as the official regulatory agency, and I think they did see the pushback that they got from any number of entities as it related to where they were headed. The ability to have the conversation, I think, was important. As a regulating agency, they are now, at least from what we've been told, they haven't had an update in a couple of weeks, but they're trying to engage with the folks that are going to be impacted, and where we are currently is continuing with all the various groups that are interested in the topic, kind of aggregating comments and thoughts and continuing to crystallize the issue to put those concerns in front of ecology so that they can continue to play their role as the regulating agency and actually have the responsibility.
So let's get to the big issue, salmon recovery. Major issue, obviously impacting, it's an understatement, major issue impacting conservation districts and your work with landowners. We're getting, as you all are familiar, increasing pressure from tribes regarding the state's need to take steps to improve habitat conditions for salmon. Tribes have identified this issue as a significant tribal treaty right, and federal courts have enforced similar treaty rights. Data shows significant habitat loss, documented progress on habitat restoration needs to be shown. Keep that in mind. Documented progress on habitat restoration and protection needs to be shown. Currently, policy discussion has shown tension between regulatory approaches and incentive-based approaches. That's a key point that I wanted to chat with you about. There's the legislation last session, the Salmon Recovery Act, had a key component was a regulatory approach that had mandatory buffers. The conversation around mandatory buffers utilizes the Department of Fish and Wildlife's Priority Habitat and Species document for salmon. And that data relies on some federal forest riparian work that was done many years ago called FEMAT. And from that, they say the mandatory buffer widths should be one site potential tree height along streams, which is anywhere from 180 to 200 feet of mandatory buffer. And that's based on the notion that at a site potential tree height, the data shows that you pick up at least 90% of the riparian function that you're trying to achieve. Now it's interesting, in my view, you look at those FEMAT curves, you can actually pick up most of that function at 100 feet or less, but it's that additional 5% or so that pushes it out further. So that's something that we'll need to look at from a commission standpoint in terms of the science. But the regulatory approach was pushed this session through that bill, but the incentive approach, which is the work that we do in engaging with landowners and developing buffers of variable width based on site specifics, such as, well, you know the details about when you work with landowners and implement NRCS practices and looking at site characteristics, and also you're balancing landowner need with riparian need to get variable width buffers. The concern in the public dialogue and the policy conversations are that incentive approaches not achieving needed habitat recovery. There's a strong push of opposition to incentive programs and relying on incentive programs, and a sense that they haven't worked, so therefore we need to go to a more regulatory approach. As I mentioned, recent legislation took the regulatory approach, but what I find interesting, and I'll touch on this, is that the legislature funded more of the incentive approach. So the regulatory bill did not make it out of committee, which is a strong signal from the legislature about their perspectives of the regulatory approach. And yet the legislature funded pretty significantly incentive-based programs. Yeah, Mike.
I think when you know that there's a strong contingent looking for the regulatory approach, I think there's a strong political push, but I think the great majority, if you're a poll, would be more for the incentive base.
Yes.
And I think that the interesting thing is if you go the regulatory route, ultimately they're going to get the exact opposite of what they want. They'll get 20 years of litigation and nothing.
So for folks online, the comment was that in the political conversation, there seems to be more of a push for a regulatory approach. But if you go external to that, there's more support for incentive-based approach. That if you push too hard on a regulatory approach, you would end up in litigation that would just delay things. We've seen that historically, litigation has delayed things. I think that's actually a fair assessment. I think but most of it again comes from understand the tribal perspective, which is from what they see, there's progress is not being made on habitat restoration and recovery. And so in their mind, they don't see incentive-based programs achieving that. And so they want to go the regulatory approach. So what we need to do, and what we'll talk about here, is we need to implement incentive-based programs to show that we can make that difference. And we have done that in the past.
So, do I understand it correctly, DFW is doing some sort of study now on regulatory versus incentive-based?
I'll touch on that in a minute.
Okay.
Hold that thought. Yeah.
Ron, I do think it's important to point out that it's not all tribes.
That's true, but the way the tribes operate, it doesn't take many vocal tribes because they operate in a consensus manner. And so if one tribe pursues it, then it'll be advanced.
I just know that the Penalty Nation is part of the 17 tribes that work with Indian issues, and they're not.
But still, the Fisheries Commission has that position. So in the funding, I alluded to the funding that we received this session. So we received $10 million for riparian habitat restoration projects. in our operating budget. Many of you saw the guidance meeting that we had to talk about that. We have 7 million in CREP, new money in CREP. We have 1.3 million for the riparian plant propagation program. And that is to get trees jump started, if you will. The idea being, well, hey, if we're going to put in all these riparian buffers, we need trees to do it. So we've got 1.3 million to grow trees and 2.7 million in district engineering. I put this in as salmon recovery because I know a lot of the district engineering work that you do is related to salmon recovery restoration projects. At other agencies, it's a significant note is that RCO and the Salmon Recovery Funding Board received 50 million for projects of over $5 million and 25 million for projects under 5 million. So quite a significant investment in incentive and project approaches. So Dave, this gets to your point. So the governor's office received 350,000 for a multi-entity process. They're just getting started to develop recommendations on proposed changes in policy and spending priorities to improve riparian habitat. And they have to have a preliminary report by October 1 and a final report by December 1. They were just sending emails on Monday that the facilitator is just starting this process. So they have to have the preliminary report by October 1. So we'll see. They can solve the salmon issue in 3 or 4 months. To your point, David, the question, it's actually the Office of Financial Management has funding to study to evaluate the effectiveness, utilization, and outcomes of the voluntary incentive program for landowners and of existing regulatory programs responsible for protecting and restoring areas along streams and rivers to achieve science-based standard for fully functioning riparian ecosystems. And that OFM study, they just got the contractor, and the preliminary report is due September 1st with a final report due December 1st. We don't know how in this process they're going to engage with the agency and ask us about our programs. And as all of you know, anytime you do a study like this, what's important are the questions that you ask can drive the conclusion, and we just simply don't know.
Do we know who the contractor is?
I'm not sure. I'm getting confused because of all the processes. I think Peter Dykstra was the contractor hired for the other process. I'm not sure if they have one for this process yet. Yeah.
Yeah, I would really love to know how the study can be put together, because in Kane County, they really should take a look at all the farmland that's been lost because of regulations. You should include that in the study, because although they were pushed to be doing a regulatory based buffer, they have pretty much stopped farming because they can't.
So for folks online, the comment was they should look at also the issue of farmland loss due to regulations. And that's a very real question. And it's interesting. I wonder if they'll get to that, because, you know, look at the purpose of it. The focus is on achieving science-based standard for riparian ecosystem. It's not, and balancing that with maintaining agricultural production. So that raises concerns. Yeah, Mike.
So why is this stuff with the Office of Financial Management? Why would the legislature do that?
Because in the waning days of legislative session, when all this is flying around fast and furious, and what can we do? And different interests are pressing to say, okay, if we're not going to get our bill, we want to do these other things. And so those interests we're pushing to at least have these studies done, and to have it at OFM, because they see OFM as a neutral entity.
That's like tasking OFM with healthcare.
And they do. And they do.
Really?
Oh, yeah. OFM is tasked with all different kinds of functions like that. Because they're
not staying in the box.
they manage the money, so it's the governor's box. So
Maybe their box anywhere where their money goes.
Yeah.
that's right. So given the context of the salmon riparian discussion, it's really critical that we demonstrate what we can achieve with our funding. We need to demonstrate, my bumper sticker, that we're doing the right thing in the right place with the right result. Rely on what we know regarding landowner engagement and utilize monitoring and adaptive management of results to show success. And we also need to utilize common database to show where projects are going and where more opportunities are. So I really want to make a real strong pitch to all of you that given the context of the debate and the conversation that's happening, not just in the legislature, but governor's office, other venues like Bill, the Salmon Recovery Council, Bill's involved in, as well as I am, there is a real strong push against incentive-based programs. And our challenge with the resources that we got is to show that no, incentive-based programs can work because we know they can work. We have done it to achieve the resource objectives of habitat improvement, cooling stream temperatures, and achieving those results. And we can do that. So looking to all of you, that's what we're really trying to do when you look at the guidance document for the salmon recovery funding. That's what we're trying to do is set the stage for that proof of what you can do to really advance that in these conversations. So I cruised through that. Any questions, more conversation, Bill?
The thought of all this isn't in a vacuum, right? And going back to the livestock water and recovery and Alice, of course, working with her on some of our scientific approach is if there's a way to do it, because I studied Southwest, it showed they don't do this for recurring areas, it actually gets students flowing. So we could help with technology. So if somebody wants to do a buffer voluntarily, maybe by doing that, we say, yes, we will secure that livestock water, right? For sure, or you get extra bonus points rather than just giving it away, but those things happen together. Right? So I think it's part of us telling our story of how we combine all these things and doing this one. We think about how all those things. That might be another one that's fit into the. We do this, we do that, and educate those other agencies. Some know it, anyhow, just throwing that out there as an idea again of that. Ron and I, yeah, we 14 years or whatever, we're constantly explaining, well, no, this is how this works. This is good. We are complimenting those efforts and understanding what they're doing. Anyhow, just throwing that out there is another example of how not to that you aren't just them alone all the time, but are related to the landowner. A farm plan, you have 5 things, 3 things, 10 things depending on the landowner. So don't, we should try to match that into one big contribution. The non-regulatory voluntary.
Yeah, and the telling your story piece is really important, and that's why I emphasized the need to utilize our database system. You'll see in the guidance what we're really trying to do too is encourage you to look at projects that you can link projects within a sub-basin, cluster projects together, be proactive, engaging with landowners and stream reaches to do that, but also look at other funded projects. So if you're working in your watershed with a salmon recovery entity and they're doing a project over here, and then you know that you can engage with a landowner downstream, well, connect those projects together. Let's show that we can connect projects because we have studies that show the one I always like to refer to as the one out of the Tucannon. We're utilizing CREP. 80% of the landowners in the sub-basin enrolled in CREP installed buffer variable width. And the data clearly showed that they reduced stream temperature by 10 degrees and you get summer water in late summer that you weren't getting before. There are studies out of the Chimicum that are good results about if you, it's the length more than the width in terms of what you're doing in restoration. There's good work out of Watcom that talks about buffers that Watcom CD has done. So there's good work out there that we can do. We just need to take this opportunity to shift our thinking from just a project here, project here, project here to say sub-basin here with the salmon recovery habitat restoration opportunity. Let's go out there and proactively engage landowners. And if you look at the guidance, there is an opportunity for you to use some of that funding to do a proposal where you would go out and develop a project list in particular areas. Yeah, Mike?
So before, like in the May meeting, we talked about or suggested a toolbox for the riparian incentive program. Has there any been further movement on that? Instead of just relying on CREP, but having like a one-time bonus payment according to soil type, but not the continued contract.
Yeah, in the CREP funding, there is one of those proposals. There are ideas like a one-time bonus payment or what we call family and friends. They do this in Oregon. If you get others in your watershed to sign up, you get a bonus. So
if we can, we like to try and avoid this.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a question on that?
Yeah, Underwood had their hand raised.
Tova?
Hi, Ron. Yeah, I was wanting to follow up on the plant
Oh,
propagation.
Tova, you might want to be muted on your end.
Oh, I thought I unmuted myself. Okay.
Oh, can't hear
if
you.
you can't hear me.
See your microphone moving, but can't hear you.
All right. Sorry, I can't get through. No, never mind.
I hear you, Tova.
Is it working?
We might have to use chat, Tova.
I'm hearing you clearly here.
So,
Oh.
More comments. Yeah, we had another hand here. Yeah.
I was just
I'll send
wondering,
my-
I saw the
I'll send it through
news
chat.
coming out For Salmon Recovery, there's like $1 million. I looked through all the eligible practices, and I'm just curious, why aren't, there's no funding for fish passage, there's no funding to like replace fish barriers. It just
Right.
seems to be all about plants. It's great, but like there's other ways, like when I'm out on the farm, they really want to know about crossings, like how can we help them with livestock crossings. And so when I just not like, I love money for plants. It's like, okay, great.
So for folks online, the question was looking at the salmon riparian funding guidance, proposed guidance that's out for comment right now. You look at the allowed practices. It doesn't look like there's in-stream projects that are in there. And that's correct because of the nature of the proviso that came with the money. So a proviso is direction in the budget bill on how we're to spend the money. It says this money is for riparian habitat restoration projects with landowners. So we are interpreting riparian habitat restoration to mean work in the riparian area, not solely in stream. And if you look at the guidance, what we're saying is if you want to do an in-stream project, it needs to be connected to an upstream riparian element.
Can I add to that?
And then I need to check with what's happening online and then
Okay,
just
just real quick, that $25 million and $50 million cost of the RCO, that $10 million is going to be divvied out through the same process they send out to Salmon Recovery throughout the state percentages. Then the 50 million is going to be kind of, they're still trying to decide that it's going to be a little bit of a, it'll be almost the same thing, but they're recognizing some areas don't normally get funded as much. So like over the east side of the state, looking out. And when it says $5 million, you can lump projects in an area together to get over that fund.
Okay, let's see if we have questions online.
Tova asks, what are the plans for the native plant propagation funding? Will that be available to CDs?
That's a great segue. Are there other questions?
That's it.
That's it. Okay, so the question was about the native plant propagation program, and the person who came up with that terrific acronym is up next. So I'm going to ask Allison to answer the question, and
I'll have it at the end of my presentation.
Allison will address it at the end of her presentation. Terrific. All right, well, thank you, and we'll hand it off to Allison.
Using salmon recovery funding for acquisition.
Question about using salmon recovery funds for acquisitions, and that came up in the webinar we had on the funding, and we'll take a look at that and get an answer for folks.
All right, thank you, Ron. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Is this on? Am I on?
It's not a
Hello?
microphone, it's on there.
Oh, sorry. Duh. Okay, well then,
So you're yelling.
never mind. I'll just yell at everybody. Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Allison Helper, and I'm the Scientific Policy Advisor for the Conservation Commission. And oh, there you go. So in the time I have, I want to talk a little bit about our new Sustainable Farms and Fields program. And then I am going to touch upon RPPP, which is the Riparian Plant Propagation Program. If you want to add an extra letter to your acronym and make it even longer, you can make it Riparian Plant Propagation Pilot Program. So you could have RPPP, but we're shortening it down. So don't worry about that. So the Sustainable Farms and Fields program, we're really excited about this. This is a brand new program. It was created through the legislature in 2020, but because of the pandemic, it's just been slowly moving along in development, but we do have funding for fiscal year 23, which is very exciting. We have $2 million in the operating budget. And for this new program, this is a little bit unique. The main goal of Sustainable Farms and Fields is to incentivize climate smart practices on farmland, rangeland, and tidal aquaculture operations. So that's the nuts and bolts of it. We want to increase climate smart practices to increase carbon sequestration and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or CO2 equivalent emissions. It recognizes that while the main goal is to increase these climate smart practices to increase carbon sequestration and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we know that there are so many co-benefits of these practices. So producers who implement these practices might get improved soil health. They might see an improved crop yields. They might find themselves in the long term with more cost-effective farming operations. It can increase their economic resiliency. It can help increase their drought resiliency, flooding resiliency, and it can increase wildlife habitat. It can increase pollinator habitat and improve air and water quality. So when you look at it holistically, there are a lot of benefits to these climate smart practices. And the way we're moving forward with this program, the way it was created, it provides technical assistance and financial assistance to growers who are either interested in climate smart practices, but don't know where to start, don't know how to do it, or if they've been implementing climate smart practices and they want to try something new, they could get that technical assistance and then get some financial assistance as well. This isn't a carbon market. There is language in the statute that does allow us eventually to make payments for stored carbon. There are a lot of challenges to that because this is in the operating budget. And so we can't promise that we can pay out for the long term, but we might be able to make an annual one-time payment, but we're still working out the details on that. We're still working with the Department of Agriculture and WSU on the best ways to quantify that sequestered carbon or reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But for some of the farms, these practices can make them more competitive in independent carbon markets. And you can even see what that is. I believe that says we're planning on starting this program this summer. Okay, it's not moving. Okay. Oh, did I go backwards? Okay, so this spring, we went ahead and distributed draft programmatic guidelines, and we got some really good comments. We heard back from 26 people who weighed in on what they liked about the draft programmatic guidelines, what could use improvement, and we did our best to incorporate a lot of those comments into a final draft that was presented to the commission at their May meeting. And those comments were included. The final draft was adopted. And one thing that we did a little bit differently is that in the draft programmatic guidelines, we had some suggested prioritization metrics based on statute, where it calls for a fair distribution geographically based on farm size, based on crops, based on soil practices. We decided to punt that and take it out of that draft guideline to the commission, because we do have a working group consisting of the commission, the Department of Agriculture, WSU, NRCS, and Fish and Wildlife, and that's in our statute. And we are working on prioritization metrics matrix so that we can share with everybody what we're going to be looking for in these proposals, how they're going to be ranked and selected. And we will have those prioritization metrics in a matrix form later on pretty soon before we kick off the program. So I want to touch upon really quickly, there were some themes in the comments we received, and one of the biggest themes that we got in these comments was in statute. It says that this program is open to conservation districts and other public entities. And so we did get feedback that said it should only be conservation districts. This is in the statute that it is open to others, but we went ahead in those programmatic guidelines and added language to say that the program is open to conservation districts and other public entities that possess the expertise to provide technical assistance and or the capacity to implement climate smart practices. And if we get proposals from other public entities and they just don't have a strong proposal, that they don't know what they're doing, or they don't have a plan to implement climate smart practices, it's not going to get scored very high. But we want to make it clear from the get-go that they have to show that they have the capacity and the expertise. We did also put language in the guidelines that say that if an application is submitted by a public entity and they indicate that they are working with their local conservation district, they will get scored higher. So we also heard some concerns, actually a lot of concerns about this program being limited to one fiscal year rather than having a biennial budget with the potential for reappropriation. And that's one of the blessings / curses of this funding coming out of the operating budget. So operating budget funding is available July 1st, and then it is over on June 30th. So that does make it difficult for any long-term projects, but for some of these climate smart practices, they should be doable within a fiscal year. One of the benefits of the operating budget, though, is we can pay for technical assistance. We can pay for materials and supplies. We can fund projects that don't really fit as capital. So we do have a lot more flexibility, but again, we do have a limitation of one fiscal year. We heard some comments about energy efficiency and the lack of language allowing for funding for energy efficiencies or to conduct energy audits. And we also heard comments that why isn't forest land considered in sustainable farms and fields? And when the bill came out, the legislature really wanted to focus strictly on farms, ranches, and aquaculture operations. We do allow for agroforestry practices, and those are listed in the programmatic guidelines. And in 2022, Representative Shoemake had introduced a House bill that would have created these sustainable farms and fields advisors who would be distributed around the state and shared by conservation districts to increase energy audits and to help producers be connected to federal, state, and local funding opportunities to implement those practices. So we are working to get that bill reintroduced next session that would allow for these energy audits and energy efficiency practices in sustainable farms and fields. So again, I touched upon this earlier. We did get a lot of feedback about those prioritization metrics that strive to achieve that fairness and distribution. In the guidelines, we had some suggested scenario about how we could break down farm sizes and how we could ensure a fair geographic distribution by regions. And we heard enough comments that we decided, again, in the statute, it directs us to consult with the Department of Agriculture, WSU, NRCS, and then in a pollinator health bill, Fish and Wildlife was able to get some language in there to be included in this consultation work group. So we are working on that right now so that we can spend more time fleshing out what those metrics are going to look like and what kind of decision-making prioritization matrix we're going to have. So I want to thank everybody. We did get a lot of really thoughtful comments and suggestions that did a lot to improve those drafts to make it a final version. This is a new program. There are a lot of known unknowns. So we're going to roll it out this fiscal year. We're going to do the best we can, and we will be deploying some adaptive management so that we can learn what's working really well and what isn't working, what needs improvement. And we see this happening for the next couple of years, that we learn from it every year. We make some improvements to the programmatic guidelines. And then when we feel that they are pretty solid and we are comfortable with what we're doing, we're going to go ahead and get them into rules. So we don't want to do that early because it is pretty time consuming. We want to make sure we get it right. So If you have questions about sustainable farms and fields, you're always welcome to reach out to me. I will do the best I can to answer those questions. And we are working on getting a sustainable farms and fields program coordinator hired soon, who will have more expertise in carbon management on agricultural systems. So that's going to be very exciting for a lot of us. So I did want to talk a little bit about the riparian plant propagation program. I have 1.2, but it is 1.3 million for fiscal year 23. And it is indicated in our budget that this is ongoing funding, so long as there is funding available. The idea here, as Ron had mentioned, we're trying to ramp up riparian restoration, and there's a lot of energy behind how do we get as much riparian buffer as possible. And there is a realization that if we do all of this riparian restoration, we're not going to have enough trees and we're not going to have enough shrubs. And a lot of the nurseries, for example, DNR, are focused on post-wildfire tree propagation. We need more riparian plants, trees and shrubs. So they had gone to the commission and asked us, would we be interested in this program? Initially, the plan was to just work with wholesale nurseries and try to contract them to produce as many of these plants as possible. We talked to the governor's office about some of the limitations there. Again, with operating funds, those end every year. So we can't go to a nursery and say, hey, if you start cultivating these plants and you grow them out for 3 to 5 years, trust us, we're going to buy them in 3 to 5 years, but we don't have that money now and we can't prepay for any deliverables, but just go ahead and grow all those. We just can't do that. So we asked if we could just develop a program and really work with the wholesale nurseries to get their ideas of what can be done with a program that has money that ends every fiscal year. And we also made it very clear that the conservation districts can be so nimble and so innovative. And we know that there are districts that have nurseries already that propagate native plants. We have the Plant Materials Center. We talked about with the governor's office and the Salmon Recovery Group that this is a great opportunity to not only propagate native trees and shrubs for riparian restoration, this is a great opportunity for the districts to really get the community involved in the process. So we gave examples. I'll give this example really quickly. I grew up in a suburb of Boston. We did not have a lot of farmland in my suburban town, but in elementary school, they gave us tomato seeds and we got to grow on the tomato seeds during the spring. And then on the last day of school, we got to take home our little tomato plants. I talked to someone in OFM who said, I grew up in Western Washington and Weyerhaeuser gave us pine cones and we grew seeds into little trees. So, the same idea that we would like to hear from the districts. What do you want to do? What can you do? Can we help fund nurseries or greenhouses at your facilities? Do you want to work with schools, senior centers, the local master gardeners? What I'm envisioning here is that we do a listening session because this is a huge opportunity. And we know that, again, there are districts that are already doing something like this we could learn from. And we have districts that have been asking about it and have some ideas on how we can ramp up native plant propagation for riparian restoration. So I'll be sending out something soon with a potential date so that we can have a listening session, or maybe we do multiple Zoom meetings so we can just start brainstorming and hearing from you so we can get this going. With RPPP, we will also have a new employee who can run this and coordinate it, figure out where the needs are for plants for restoration and who's doing what and what the nurseries are doing. This is going to take a lot of coordination and communication. So we will have somebody there. We'll have somebody in fiscal helping with contracts. So this could be planting the seed for a really cool new program within the commission. Sorry. I like being funny. So if you have any questions, you know how to get hold of me. You can call, you can text, you can email. And I love hearing from you, so please don't be shy. And I think that's it. And I have about 30 seconds. Any questions?
I actually have a question. What is an example of carbon sequestration practices in aquaculture?
So specifically in the statute, and the question was, what's an example of carbon sequestration in a tideland aquaculture operation? And the example that was given in statute is they talked about seagrasses. So I know with kelp, that's going to be further out in deeper water, but for that intertidal, it could be planting native eelgrass, Zostera marina. I have found a couple of studies from Western Washington University where they measured carbon sequestration. It is not as high predictably as other eelgrass species in tropical areas, but there is a potential to sequester carbon through the plantings of these native eelgrass, the Zostera marina. So I think that's what we're looking at. Mike, I haven't talked to you yet. I haven't talked to anyone from the shellfish industry yet, but that's what we're looking at is, can we increase eelgrass production? And again, with those co-benefits of having a keystone species providing that good habitat.
Salmon is working with Bright Harbor Labs to start seed bank for Boston Marine labs. And increase, we have one now, we're increasing the scale of that, trying to plant by seed instead of plant transplant. So that resource will regionally so for second round application.
That's awesome. Can you touch base with me later on? Because I'd like to hear more about that and see how we can incorporate that in. Thank you.
And I don't see it really being a propagation issue in Vilpa, especially because we have a surplus of eelgrass.
Of native eelgrass.
We have a lot of Japan.
I know. I'm trying to be optimistic, Mike. Painting a happy picture. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
I have a question that I didn't want to ask. Sure.